Sheila Purcell. I'm the director of UC Hastings College of Law's Center for Negotiation and Dispute Resolution. And we are delighted to have our former director, Grande Lum, joining us today to speak about his wonderful new book, America's Peacemakers. Grande is a man with many pasts, including a past that involved being confirmed by the Senate. And just before getting on the call, we were chatting and he was saying that watching the Supreme Court hearings today was reminding him of being the nervous nominee for the CRS position. Grande, do you want to say a word about that before I do the rest of your bio?
Sure. I must have blocked it totally out of my head. I was watching it. I didn't think of it until I started preparing for this. I think it must be PTSD from doing that. But I remember being very nervous. I guess the room looks very different now. The senators that were there that are still there are Senator Mike Lee and Grassley and Blumenthal. And the one thing I remember is Senator Lee said, because he was conservative and he was asking tough questions, and he said, I have a couple more questions for you, but I'm going to get back to you after, because there are other judicial nominees also sitting next to me. I'll get back to you. And then his time ran up before he got back to me. So that was like the best. That was the best thing about that.
Run out the clock. Well, Grande Lum is currently the Provost of Menlo College here in California. And prior to joining Menlo, he was the director of the Divided Communities Project at Ohio State University Moritz College of the Law. I may ask him about that a little bit later. He was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate in 2012 to become director of the Community Relations Service, which we'll be hearing more about because it's the focus of the new book. The CRS is an agency within the Department of Justice, and we'll hear more about it because very few people have heard about it. I think it's been under wraps on purpose, so we can inquire about that as well. But before joining CRS, Grande was the clinical professor and director of the Center for Negotiation and Dispute Resolution here at UC Hastings. So we're delighted to have him back. And our plan is to turn it over to him to speak for about 20 minutes on the book. I'll ask a few questions and we hope you will too. We invite you to use the chat for putting questions in the queue. Maybe just mark it as a question unless it's a comment, which not everything has to be a question. Hindal Jarbaro, our Senior Academic Program Coordinator, and Mattie Robertson, our Deputy Director, will be monitoring the chat. So with that, take it away, Grande.
Thank you, Sheila. And I very much want to thank Sheila and Mattie and him, the whole Hastings team for hosting this. This is really the first talk that I'm doing on the book, and it is amazing, really touching actually, to see so many old friends, some folks who I haven't seen in a long time, and my dad's even on the line today. So that's, I think, the first Zoom call I've done with my dad. So it's terrific to have him here as well. But it's wonderful to see you all. I'm really excited about being here and talking about this book. I do want to give a quick shout out to John Landy, who very quickly wrote a review of the book in time to get it out in advance of this event. So John was terrific about that as well. So as Sheila said, I'm going to just speak about 20 minutes on the book. And then I think Sheila's going to ask a couple questions, and then we're going to, I think, answer questions via the chat. So where should I start? I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and hopefully this will work here. Let's see. Can everybody see a picture of the a picture here?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. And so this is the book. This is we're really excited to have it out there right now, and I'm terrifically excited about it. I want to say a few things. One is that this is really the second edition of a book. The first book was written in 2005, and it was written by a man named Bertram Levine. And the original title was Resolving Racial Conflict, the Community Relations Service and Civil Rights, 1964 to 1989. And it was the book that when I started thinking about CRS, about doing the work, and I did not know about it until I was working at Conflict Management, Inc., the firm that Roger Fisher started, and our firm was engaged to provide some training to the Community Relations Service. And some of you may know Robert Singliano or Michael Moffett. They actually conducted the training for them initially. And that's how I first learned about CRS. And when I was nominated for the position by President Obama, I tried to find whatever I could. And I really didn't know that much beyond what I had heard from my colleagues about it. I knew they had done some amazing work dating back to 1964. And this book it opened up my eyes, and I'm going to speak a little bit about it. But sadly, Mr. Levine had passed away, but I actually had the chance to meet his sons, David Levine, who's actually on the line with us today, and Neil Levine. And they were really gracious, and we talked for years, and ultimately I asked them whether it would be all right to add the following 1990 to 2020, 2019 really here. And they were very gracious in saying yes. And David, I don't know if you're willing to say a few sentences about maybe the process your dad took in this book.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, what I mostly want to say, I want to express on behalf of my brother Neil and I and our sister Sue, our great gratitude to Grande. What an unexpected blessing to have this kind of crowning work of our father after this career in CRS augmented. And also I've had a chance to read Grande's additional chapters in his introduction, and certainly think and feel that in caliber and spirit, in values and sort of honoring the complexity and contributions of CRS, he's done a wonderful job. In terms of my dad's process, it was extensive interviews and also deep archival work. What's interesting is his own professional training only took him as far as a journalist's degree, an undergraduate degree. So he's really was a self-taught scholar. But I think it's clear from the totality of the book and the two sections that he really it stands well as a work of deep scholarship. And there he is. In any case, so it's a wonderful opportunity, and also it brings me into kind of a different world, a different professional orbit. So I'm quite keen to just listen and learn in this session.
Thank you, Dave. I just really I'm so appreciative to the whole Levine family for doing this. So let me now go to the beginning of the story here. And I'm gonna go through it really quickly because we don't have a lot of time. But this picture may be familiar to you all. It was from the Birmingham boycott in 1963 with Bull Connor. And it was a photo that became very famous. And this was really interesting to think about the Birmingham boycott now, but it was really about Black empowerment in terms of forcing the city of Birmingham to desegregate, de facto desegregation. Of course, George Wallace was the governor here in the situation. The one piece I want to share here is that Burke Marshall, who was then the Civil Rights Division lead, basically negotiated, played the mediator between Martin Luther King and others with the city. And this led to a really positive outcome. And partly because of that, and as we know, this then leads to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because Lyndon Baines Johnson was very much a proponent of it. He had Arthur Goldberg actually write the legislation. And he believed in the importance of people to resolve their own problems, pushed for it. And in what happened then was that it passed in 1964. Very interestingly, in 1964, July 2nd, when it passed, the only thing that Johnson talked about that day was the Community Relations Service. Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, was very concerned about protests, about rioting, actually. And so Lyndon Baines Johnson was very much focused on that piece of it. It turned out, actually, that people were very fairly peacefully settled many of the disputes. Now, there are clearly many aberrations from that, but that happened as a way of beginning into this. What you see now is a picture from March 7th, 1965. This is Bloody Sunday. This was when 84 people were injured, 17 people were hospitalized. And of course, this is about voting rights, which is still hugely important today. In front, you see John Lewis, who later on became a congressman, but who led the march onto the Pettus Bridge. Because of what happened on that first march, Lyndon Johnson sent CRS into the situation very aggressively to deal with it. And that's where the first director, Leroy Collins, and others really focused on keeping the people safe, keeping John Lewis, Andrew Young, and others as safe as possible, and actually mediated the safe passing on the Pettus Bridge, which you may have seen in the recent movie called Selma. Here's a quick picture of the first director, Leroy Collins. He actually had one of the most difficult nominating sessions where actually a physical fight broke out between two senators to prevent him from being approved by the committee, being passed by committee. But I just raised this because he was there to help resolve the dispute, and he actually marched with them in the third march. You'll see John Lewis, Andrew Young, Martin Luther King, Coretta Scott King, and Ralph Abernathy. Interestingly about the cost of this, the day after this, he had been the governor of Florida, and this picture was used against him when he ran for the Senate in Florida. And he actually said that this was probably what cost me the election. He had no regrets, but goes to the point of a point that I'd like you to all think about as we go through this is the purpose and goal of CRS as mediators, as in terms of the pursuit of justice. One theme that I thought a lot about, which I really spent a lot of time thinking and pondering, was the idea of peace versus justice, right? We certainly hear the saying of no justice, no peace, thinking about neutrality versus advocacy. What is success here for CRS in terms of thinking about that issue? This is the second director here. And the second director, this is when he was Roger Wilkins, who was one of the few African-Americans in the LBJ administration. Again, I think one thing that's his uncle, Roy Wilkins, who was within the NAACP. Worth noting, when he went out there, he actually went out with Cyrus Vance and Warren Christopher into Detroit after when there was protesting, and he actually had a gun pointed to his head in those situations, and goes to even the danger, even though he was high up within the LBJ administration, of the challenges. One thing I should say is that he really thought of CRS as the second director has focused on not just on the going in to play the mediation role right during a high protest like we're seeing today with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. He really focused on the underlying causes, on issues of poverty, on issue of jobs, and actually use CRS to help increase that. That's an interesting point as we think about justice and peace as well. I'm going to just say, I'm going to go through and talk just about a few of the folks who were at CRS and the big conflicts that they were involved in. I don't want to give it all away. I want you guys to buy the book. So I was going to give you a few highlights here. This is Dick Salem, who later on wrote one of the first mediation books with Nancy Rogers. One of the first law school mediation books was co-written by Dick and by Nancy. And he was involved in a number of situations, included Wounded Knee, the takeover of Wounded Knee. He actually was involved at Kent State, later on worked at South Africa. But for here, I want to just briefly talk about the fact that for those of you who are law students or lawyers, will certainly remember the Skokie case, which was a First Amendment case standing for the right for free speech, even if it's for hate speech, like for Nazism. This is David, excuse me, this is Frank Collin, who was the Nazi head here. And he was a small little group. You may remember him from the Donahue show. He was on that. He was focused on protesting within Skokie, a suburb of Illinois, where half the folks were Jewish. There was a high concentration of Holocaust survivors. In that situation, he was going through to the Supreme Court about his right to protest. His lawyer was a man named David Goldberger, who was at the ACLU, who was Jewish, as was Frank Collin, as was the Nazi leader here. It looked very clear that it was going to be like Charlottesville that we've seen recently, and in terms of there was a belief that there was going to be a lot of violence. It was pretty clear in that situation. David Goldberger, the attorney, did not know about CRS, but when he heard them, said, well, that's my client. This Frank Collin is my client here. I want to make sure at least to introduce them. So that introduction was critical because most groups did not have any desire to meet with Collin, but as a mediator, he did. Interestingly, when I was interviewed for the Community Relations Service, that was, again, created by the Title 10 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, focused on mediation and conflict. I was asked about that, whether I would be willing to send people in or personally be involved in cases involving that. And we can certainly talk about that more as well. What interestingly, David Goldberg, who later taught at the Ohio State University, said was, he really truly believed, I actually have the quote, I think had CRS not intervened, it would have gone forward in Skokie. There's no doubt in my mind that I anticipated a bloody confrontation here. And he was really surprised, and he said that was incredibly important in doing so. And partly I share, I hope it's okay, I share photos of the conciliators because they often worked in anonymity. They often worked with death threats against them, and they worked behind the scenes, which, as Sheila mentioned at the beginning, the fact that it's not well known is partly by design. In the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it says that you're supposed to work without publicity, and actually can get arrested if you break confidentiality. Silke was one of the first, I think, critical mediators. She was one of the first women to mediate for CRS. She did work within Rodney King, actually mediating between Korean American groups in terms of dealing with the issue of money was coming in from Korea and how to disperse that amongst Korean American groups. She was involved in the Boston Public Schools and desegregation. And as you remember, this was quite a difficult one in terms of, and the amount of animosity in Boston at the time and the pushback against desegregation. It's one where she really focused on putting together biracial parenting groups and folks that talk with each other. The only thing, one thing I want to add there was Arthur Garrity, who was the judge who was implementing the desegregation order, was a huge fan of hers, of Silke, because she was willing to do this. Later on, she wrote that, you know, there's been almost he wrote that there has almost been fanatical resistance in South Boston, which has been the scene of violence and ugly confrontation. Only Miss Hansen remains undiscouraged. And what she did was she really went in. She would often sometimes break up knife fights and all that, and made a huge difference in trying to keep the lines of communication open. One thing that Garrity later wrote when he wrote a letter to Jimmy Carter about CRS said that the budget that year for CRS was $6 million, and it was $10 million for police security. Can you believe that? At South Boston High School for 2 years. This is Tom Battles, who actually works at the Ohio State Divided Community Project right now, and I think is one of the legendary mediators that we've had there. And he worked in the Elian Gonzalez case, I think, which is pretty amazing, which I can talk more about as well. And again, in that situation, there was where he had to go into hiding because of the concern there as well. And I'll talk about him a little bit more because I'm going to talk a little bit about the Trayvon Martin case as well. As you remember, this is the photo that went around the world on this, and there was an attempt at mediation, and it got very, very close. And it doesn't always work out as we think about what is success in these situations. It was, I think, a really valiant attempt in terms of doing so. Janet Reno, of course, was involved in this, and we had worked it where we almost had it, but the White House would not permit it because if Janet Reno didn't walk out with Elian, it would not have been from the White House's perspective, it would have made sense, but it was a very valiant attempt to doing so. This is the team that did the church burning. If you remember the African-American church burnings that occurred in 1990s, a team of CRS folks actually went out into the South primarily in order to investigate and focus on prevention of that. You see Janet Reno in the middle of that, and a few other very prominent CRS mediators as well. Trayvon Martin, I just want to spend a little bit of time trying to get to situations that we're more familiar with over the last few years. As you remember, Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old young man who on February 26, 2017 was shot. This was a situation where the small town of Sanford was very, very concerned. And Thomas Battles, who I showed to you earlier, led a team that was very focused on trying to help bring justice in a certain way, and certainly help the town of Sanford in doing so. Because I think this is a unique situation in that the city manager, who was Norton Bonaparte, and a city employee, Andrew Thomas, who now works for the Divided Community Project, were really focused and really worked together to welcome the protest groups, whether it was Jesse Jackson's group here and others, and in really working with both the Black pastors and the white pastors, focusing on rumor control. The mayor to this day is very thankful. There were like over 80 protests. They were clearly concerned about the Stand Your Ground law, which was involved in this case. And in that case, really helped the city engage with the community leaders in a positive fashion. Of course, we know after the innocent verdict for Zimmerman is when Black Lives Matter gets formed. And fast forwarding a little bit to, this is when Michael Brown was shot. CRS was the first agency on the ground after the August 9th, 2014 shooting. And I remember this very well. I got the call on Saturday and sent two conciliators, what CRS calls conciliators, to them, Derek Dean and Rita Valenciano. And interestingly, this is still different from today with what's going on. I'll never forget, they told me how they thought they would go down to, when they didn't know very much, they were driving down to Ferguson. Typically what had been happening up until that point had been many of these types of situations where a young Black person is shot by police. There'd be some sort of candlelight visual, and then they would drive home the next day in many of these situations. They had gone through this many times. But in this situation, when they arrived, they saw something very different, clearly. And I do want to say Derek Dean and Rita Valenciano spent a year in Ferguson, pretty much away from their homes in order to try to help folks there. And as you remember, this was a situation where there was quite a bit of protesting and some violence, and there was concern. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, had a decision to make to whether he would go to try to quell the violence in that situation. And he actually told me it was his most difficult decision in whether or not to do this, because if he didn't, with a Black president and a Black Attorney General, that this would look really bad upon them. They turned to, the Attorney General turned to us at CRS because we were the first federal agency on the ground, and we had connections with the community members and civil rights members. So within 48 hours, this is pretty astounding what the team did. They set up meetings with the community, with local residents, with faith leaders, and with young people and that day to try to really help stop the violence, not the peaceful protesting, of course, but the violence. And so on August 20th, I facilitated a town hall, and as you can see in the picture, Attorney General Holder was speaking, and I'll never forget, I mean, it's the first time I heard him say it, was he said, you know, I am the Attorney General of the United States, but I'm also a Black man. And he talked about a New Jersey stop where he had been stopped as a young man in that situation. So it was very touching. I'll very much remember that day because we were concerned about what would happen that night, and it was the first night that was peaceful, and there was still protests, but there was the violence that stopped. It made a difference in that moment here. I want to stop. I want to say a short anecdote about this situation, and then I want to turn it over to Sheila to ask a few questions here. This is a picture of Harpreet Singh. His mother was killed in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And why I share that was, you know, we had been involved since it was my first day at CRS, and I was flying to meet my staff for the first time. And this happened that morning as I was flying out. We worked hard in terms of, and we had worked for years on Sikh or Sikh issues because of the backlash violence aimed at them. And we made a difference in mediating with the parties, helping them deal with the hospital issues. The one thing I point out is, you know, it is important to be there at the moments of crisis, but it's also what can be done to change things. What the Civil Rights Division and CRS worked on, and what Harpreet Singh was doing here when he was testifying in front of a Senate committee to Dick Durbin, was to include different religious groups in the uniform crime reporting that police need to provide in terms of hate crime reporting. At that point, there was no category for anti-Sikh violence. And because of courageous individuals like Harpreet, it happened, but it took a long time. This happened this was in August 2012. Robert Mueller, who is the head of the FBI, one of his very last official acts was to add categories of new religious groups to be added to the hate crimes reporting for Sikh, Hindu, Arab, Buddhist, Mormon, and for other groups as well. To me, it also provides the understanding of it is not just the moment of crisis, it is what can be done when faced with tragedy, what can be done to improve it. I'll end here. This is July 14th, 2014. I remember it because it was also my birthday. It was my 50th birthday. We also celebrate the 50th anniversary of CRS. This is the collection of folks, and I want to end here because these are the people who really made a difference and who have done so much and who have done so anonymously. So let me stop there, and I want to turn it over back to Sheila.
Thank you, Grande. Amazing. What stories. I'm curious about some really pedestrian questions, like how many people work for CRS and where are they located? That's sort of basic, and then I have other questions.
Yeah, so there are 14 offices throughout the country. When I was there, we were up to about, I think, 70 plus employees. It's less than half at this point now. The Trump administration focused on the elimination of CRS as an agency. There were 10, for example, there were 10 regional directors, people who would lead each of the 10 regional offices with 4 field offices. There are only 2 regional directors at this time. Many have either left or retired.
How has your work, or how has their work changed during the pandemic? Curious. Virtual works for many things, but for this kind of community building and organizing, how is that?
Yeah, it's a whole different, we're experiencing right here. By the way, I'm excited. I bought a new computer so I could see 49 people instead of 24. So I think it's actually really terrific. I can see many of you, not just half of you right now, but it's to that point. It became really hard to do the work because they can't. So they've been doing the meetings via Zoom. So the benefits of that couple are that given limited travel budgets anyway, now since people are accustomed to it, you can meet with a variety of folks. Thomas Battles, who now works for the Divided Community Project, will say it's really hard because part of what you get is just being out there with the folks and communicating and meeting with people and meeting them in the schools and all of that. So I think there's been both the huge challenge and, leave aside COVID-19, just the fact that the agency has been, pummeled in much smaller entity than it was before, but certainly within that. I do want to say, what the Ohio State Divided Community Project has done, I'll share a little bit more when a little bit later as well, has been to create a bridge initiative to help communities in this time. And it's often by doing Zoom, it's been by providing briefings, it's been providing experts, whether mediators or police chiefs or city managers or mayors, to help with cities like Portland, Oregon, which we know we have been suffering quite a bit as well.
So just to back up and give a bit of a picture of the Divided Communities Project, maybe you could describe it for everyone and say a bit more about what that group has been doing.
Yeah, great that you asked. Let me share the screen one more time here, if I can easily. Let me do that. Okay. Can you guys see this screen here?
I can.
Okay, so can you see the slide on the Divided Community Project? So it was Nancy Rogers, who's on the line today, is one of the co-founders, along with Josh Stolberg and Sarah Cole, all law professors at the Ohio State. It was an outgrowth of a conference, a symposium that Nancy, Josh, Sarah, Bill Froelich was involved as well, in terms of how to take these moments, how to take insights gained from law enforcement, from community leaders to strengthen community, right? There's community unrest, but let's harness the power for that. And let's use mediation in that. There have been a number of initiatives. I just mentioned the Bridge Initiative, really providing consultation out there for to communities, oftentimes over Zoom, real-time advice in actual situations. And we've worked with folks in Portland, in Bloomington, Indiana, when there was a white supremacist issue there, for example. So the Ohio State has done that. There's been a number of initiatives, and we're the Divided Community Project is very thankful to the JAMS Foundation, which has provided a significant amount of funding to do this work. But none of this would have been possible without JAMS, and we certainly have worked. I say we. I'm still a member of the steering committee, so I can say the we part of this is worked with the ABA dispute resolution section. The AAA has been very, very good in terms of different initiatives that we've done. A campus academy working with campus polarization issues, and some simulations that have been terrific as well. So they're doing great work. Please do Google. It's a great website with a lot of different tools for different leaders, faith leaders, government leaders, bar leaders, as such as well. And you can see the link. You can get the tool site there. Okay.
And I see
we have a question in the chat here from Courtney White. Does CRS work with the Department of Justice in collaborative efforts?
The CRS, I should have been clear, is within the Department of Justice. Originally, it was started in the Commerce Department, but moved over within a couple of years for there. So it is an agency, to be clear, within the Department of Justice, and works. So we would often coordinate, certainly, depending on the situation, with the Civil Rights Division, for example, working with the local U.S. attorneys' offices as well. It gives some advantage. You know, when you talk about the social justice side, because CRS was part of DOJ, when it called into a community, it would get people to pay attention because it was the Department of Justice. Of course, right now, there's some problematic aspects to it, because to say you're from the Department of Justice, and for some communities, there's a concern that, oh, you're with the Trump administration Department of Justice. That certainly has created some concerns that they have to work with, even though the mediators, the conciliators are the same people. But again, that's part of the politicization of this.
Yeah, I just have one more question, and then I'd love to open it up to the group. But what do you think the direction and future of CRS might be? And I know that probably depends on the election, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like all of us, I mean, so much of our democracy is hinging upon what happens in 21 days or so. And certainly this is true for CRS. I'm just stating what I think is factual and true is if the Democrats win, I think there's an opportunity for renewed funding for CRS, for the ability to take on the many challenges that currently exist. So there's a lot of support by some congressional members for sure for CRS. I think what's going on in this country as we look around with political polarization, that's at a very high level, to the racial conflicts that have been going on. You know, we just need to look at our phones or turn on our televisions to see there. So I think the opportunity is to be more proactive, to be working closely between, one thing that I think is important to note is law enforcement really appreciated CRS. I have worked, you know, it's working with the civil rights leaders, with the protesters, but they were very appreciative, whether it was a Black Lives Matter group or others, that there was somebody to play that third party role to get them to a safer place, right? To help create greater likelihood of communication and agreements that could be made.
Great. Well, now I'd love to open it up to any questions from all of you. And if you want to either put them in the chat, or we'll look around in the gallery here if you have your hand up. Well, I know I can always prompt John Landy to ask a question. He wrote a beautiful blog post on this book. John, are you there? And do you have any questions? Okay, maybe not. Oh, here we go. John, your mic is not on?
Yes, I am here. And gosh, you know, when I was writing it, I had a question in mind. Well, first, I just want to plug the book. It is fabulous. And I also want to plug my review, which I put in the chat because it elaborates on a lot of the stuff that Grande is talking about. And I guess the question that I have, I was reflecting at the end of my review about the idea about mediating Brown versus Board of Education, which many people in our field have said, oh, you can't mediate a case like Brown versus Board of Education. What's the role of litigation in something like that? And I dug up Owen Fiss's famous or infamous against settlement case or article, and he was saying, well, you know, a case like Brown, you know, can abolish the caste system, which, as I wrote, seemed kind of naive at the time, and even more so now. So, how do you see, Grande, about the relationship between litigation and conciliation and political processes?
Yeah, no, John, you wrote very eloquently about that. I mean, you know, I went to law school to become a civil rights lawyer, right? I have a strong believer in litigation to right wrongs. There are cases that need to be litigated. There's changes that having the precedent makes a huge difference. Certainly, Brown v. Board Education makes sense. Certainly, important legislation like the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, they're critical to creating the kind of society that we want. And John, I think, when we talked about it, they can go hand in hand, right? In the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was important to then, how do we implement this, and how do we have people solve their own issues, right? Lyndon Johnson thought it was so critical to doing so, and they played a huge difference going into the South and working between the residents and the hotel owners or the restaurant owners. So I think, right, even after Brown v. Board of Education, we know that not everything changed overnight, right? You can change the law, but you still have to change hearts and minds. You still have to help people through. And there's so many great mediators around this Zoom screen who have done work because we believe in the ability of people to solve their own issues. So, the Skokie case was an example of, there was the case that upheld of Collins' right to free speech as a Nazi, but weren't we really fortunate to have an incredible team of mediators who helped prevent bloodshed in that situation that diverted what would have happened there, a high level of violence. And ultimately, as a community, I think mediation, negotiation, conciliation are all positive things.
Brand, you've got a whole bunch of questions in the
Oh,
chat now. If you want me to
a whole bunch
look
of
at those, or I can read them out to you.
What you can go ahead and pick, and you can which ones that you want me to answer in what order.
They're all good. Here, this one will be short first. What accomplishment during your time with CRS are you most proud of?
That's a wonderful question. I'm proud of the agency, right? I am proud of what we were able to accomplish during our time. I would say I think Sanford was one that I mentioned earlier, where it was, I think, an example of the governmental leaders, the mayor, the city manager, working with the protesters in a positive way. Not that it was beautiful and collaborative, but they were able to keep people safe and yet allow for First Amendment rights to be enacted, and to doing so as a way of improving it. Today, Andrew Thomas, who I've gotten to know, over time, is still doing good work. That's as a result of trying to turn the page on what happened in Sanford years ago with youth, with the city, within some of the poorer areas of that area, and still doing so of a collaborative way. So I think I would point towards that. Certainly, I shared the Ferguson situation. I was incredibly proud, working under incredible stress, that the team was able to accomplish something that was unclear whether we would be able to accomplish in that moment. But thanks for the question.
Okay. How does a lone individual or one volunteer to be a part of this effort to bring communication and understanding and peace in communities? So how does someone get involved, I believe? Okay.
Well, there's, I think, a lot that you can do. And we have folks from PCRC. I'll plug Ann Burrs is from PCRC here today. I mean, you can certainly become a mediator. You can certainly become a trainer. If you believe in these principles, I think that PCRC, community boards, at least locally in the San Francisco Bay Area, are wonderful organizations to be a part of and to enact that. Bill Urey talks about that. Bernard Mayer, others have talked about what individuals can do, whether on a policy scale or in a neighborhood on a neighborhood level. Those things can all make a difference.
Great. I'll read another one. You mentioned you had some thoughts on justice versus peace as a part of the work of CRS. Can you say more about your thoughts on the issue? Are these in tension with the work of CRS?
And that's from Rishi, so it's good to see you, Rishi, as well. Yeah. So there's always been, I think it's fair to say, I mentioned the Selma case, the situation. There was an internal division between King and some of his lieutenants in that situation. There was SNCC there. There was the church that was there, of that they wanted more confrontation, right? That it would be beneficial to have that. And I think there's, if I took it another level up, right, from justice of peace to, is it being neutrality versus advocacy, right? To being neutral in a situation versus being an advocate. I mentioned Roger Wilkins, the second director, and he very much believed that there was more work to be done on the advocacy side of this piece. The one thing I would say that really has made me think is that this was part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The jurisdiction of the Community Relations Service within the Department of Justice gets expanded by the 2009 Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. I think what's important about this legislation is that they were meant to be changed, and as an agency, the conciliator is meant to advance that, right, to move it in that direction. So it is about perhaps what Obama has spoken to, or King of the Arc of Justice, and how to bend it in a certain way. So it's been an ever-present thing that I think that sometimes the conciliators will feel mixed about as well. I believe both are possible. I think King, for example, said, I think peace is not the absence of tension. Peace also requires the presence of justice. And I think that's a great way to think about this, that there's a role, I think, for the mediator or for someone to advance the cause of justice. And I think CRS has done that in its history.
Great. I think we have time for a couple more questions, and then we're getting close to the end here. So Mattie, what's up next? You're muted.
Thanks. Does CRS have an aftermath effort that promotes the efforts made by the second director of CRS? What processes are put in place to identify when it's time for a mediator to leave a cause or remain in a particular location where peaceful protests are antagonized?
Courtney, that's a terrific question. From Wilkins' time, I mean, the agency at one point was pushing close to 500 employees. Unfortunately, most of those efforts around, actually, there was one I don't think I mentioned earlier, which is about media, the underrepresentation of minorities in the media. There was a program in that. There was a program in housing. That went away in the early 70s. But as I mentioned earlier, even in Ferguson, we certainly work in the aftermath in situations. Derek Dean and Rita Valenciano certainly stayed in Ferguson because of the huge amount of needs that came about afterward, and in some ways played the role of a social worker, right? Of knowing the resources that can be brought to bear, whether by the Small Business Administration or by HUD, Housing Urban Development. There's a way in which they can connect people or bring other resource to them, which is also the case in Sanford. So I think it is important. Like the Divided Community Project focuses on resiliency. It's very much on the idea of, if something has happened, what can we do to improve, right? To improve the situation, and given that the spotlight has been shined on it.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, Mattie, and then I'm going to wrap up at about 5 of. So
great. So let me make sure I'm trying to do these kind of in order. Do you have approaches for when two groups are in extreme ends, or when they're determined to stay angry, or in cases where there's mental illness as an issue?
Yeah, let me see that one. Can you repeat that one more time? Oh, yes.
From 9SN.
Yeah, I see it. Yep. Thanks, Nina. Good. Thanks for coming. And Nina's been very active with SEEDS, another wonderful organization, conflict resolution organization, which I certainly have had the chance to participate as well. You know, that's the issue of going to extreme ends, and you know, Nina and I have had that conversation a few times about that. It's about identity, right? It's about emotion. These are the intractable disputes here. There may be issues that can be resolved, right? I mean, I talked about the Skokie case, or you talked about Charlottesville. The goal is not to come to agreement there, right? The goal, and you're not going to come to some sort of agreement because these are moral issues, these are religious issues, and the goal there may just be safety, right? The goal there is may be very different. So I think that's an important piece as we think about what is success, or what, you know, what is the, where is there a tension between justice and peace in that equation. So I think it can be the conciliator's job to figure out what is possible. So I think to Nina's question, that's what's going to be important to determine for that portion. On the mental illness case situation, certainly when I was there, I was very proud that we focused on, because disability challenges are covered within the jurisdiction because of the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. That we did more understanding. Just like I think that's where knowledge and understanding makes sense, because CRS worked a lot with law enforcement. It could work with law enforcement. And you've certainly seen cases where that's been a case, right? If someone, we know that there's been acts of violence committed against people with mental illness, and often if they're of color as well. So I think those issues have to be taken into account. By the way, now I'm thinking the other thing I was really proud of was on these issues, because the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act had passed just before I got just a little bit before I got started. We created videos and trainings on how law enforcement dealing with transgender issues. We were the first to create a video training from the federal government on transgender issues. So that was, we were something we were also very proud of as well.
Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up the questions. I want to turn briefly to a quote that you had on your flyer from Eric Holder, asking, how can we reaffirm our determination to meet intolerance with understanding, ignorance with informed dialogue, and promote opportunity, access, and inclusion in every community and circumstance. And I think that's what CRS strives to do. I think that's what your life and legacy have been about, Grande, and it's just fantastic that you can share it in this way. So a big shout out to you and to all of the folks at CRS who run towards conflict and engage it in powerfully positive ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, if John Landy's still here, I want to promote our next Lunch and Learn series, which will be on October 28th. We'll be featuring John and a book that he co-authored on risk assessment. John, you want to say just a word or two about that?
Sure. What I plan to talk about is an evolving frustration that I've had about some concepts in the dispute resolution field, and particularly, for example, the two models of negotiation and the two models of mediation. And I think that the work coming out of this book that I co-authored with two Canadian law professors can help reconcile that and come up with a better way of thinking about it and avoid what I find not a very helpful debate.
Great. Well, it should be another engaging hour, and I want to turn it back to you, Grande, for any final thoughts.
I just want to thank everybody. It is so wonderful to see so many folks, especially some Hastings people I haven't seen in a long time, like Mark Aronson. It's wonderful to see Mark as well. So it's great to see all of you. Thank you, Colin. It's great to see you as well, and Dorit. So on all of you. I don't mean I leave anybody out, but I want to leave with one quote. It's the epigraph for the book. It's by Congressman John Lewis, who said something here. So I just want to read that as my close, because I do. This was about the people who did the work. This is about David's father, who did this work for a long period of time. This is for the people who did it. So I just want to read that, and I'll call it a day. And again, thank you all very much. In a time of unnecessary trouble and disorder, the members of CRS had the capacity and courage to cool the tensions of a nation. They helped to bring order where there would have been chaos. They helped bring peace where violence would have ruled the day. On behalf of a grateful nation, on behalf of a grateful people, on behalf of those who gave all they had in this fight, I stand here to say thank you for all that you did to help to get us where we are today. So, he's a special person, and I thought that'd be a wonderful way to end it. So thanks all. It was terrific. It was really touching to see so many of you today, and thanks again, Sheila, Mattie, and Hin.
Well, thank you, Gran. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for coming from around the country. And we even had a guest from Turkey. So, and I'm especially thankful that your father is here and that the Levine family members have been here. It's an important legacy that you've continued, Gran, and just thank you so much, everyone. We'll stay on for a few more minutes just to visit with anyone who wants to hang out. But with that, we close. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Grant.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, thank you, Sheila. I'm happy that I've learned about this lunch series. I
Well,
look forward.
where are you based?
I'm in Florida.